I'm ethnically Cook Island and a New Zealand Member of Parliament. I have a relationship with a couple of women parliamentarians in the Cook Island House of Parliament, and as new members of Parliament we've often had discussions about the things that we would like to do to support each other through our parliamentary career. Having a close kin relationship with these women, we felt it was safe to discuss some of the challenges that we had as parliamentarians. From our discussions, it occurred to me that there would be other women members of Parliament across the Pacific region that may find it useful to have someone to discuss some of the issues that came up for them. Being a member of the New Zealand House of Representatives meant that I also had access to resources that they wouldn't have from their small nation state. So I was able to tap into support for them with regards to writing legislation or just really having access to some of the administrative support that we enjoy in the New Zealand House of Parliament. If I give you some context about what the Pacific region is like, there are 12 Commonwealth countries that make up the Pacific region, New Zealand being the largest parliament within that. We're actually dominated in our geography by millions and millions of square kilometres of ocean, and dotted through those millions of square kilometres of ocean are the small nation states that make up the Pacific region. There are some islands and nations larger and smaller than others. For example, there are 4,000 people that live on the island of Niue. The Cook Islands, which is 15 islands, has about 16,000 people living on it. Fiji is one of the largest nations, and that has several 100,000 people living on the island, on the various islands of the Fiji group. So as a region, we're quite small in terms of land mass, but very, very huge in terms of ocean mass. Because of that, technology is often very difficult to access, it's difficult to communicate, and often very expensive to do so. The Indigenous people of New Zealand are known as tangata whenua, or people of the land, and we refer to people of the Pacific as tangata o te moana, or people of the ocean. That not only represents our relationship to them in terms of our kin relationship and our shared migration history, but it actually really does cement the responsibility and role that we have as the larger nation within the Pacific region, and the requirements that we have to support the rest of the Pacific. So given this context and the relationship the women MPs from the Cook Islands and I have, we began exploring the idea of developing a mentoring program for women parliamentarians across the Pacific, using the New Zealand resources that we have, and using women parliamentarians from the New Zealand House of Representatives. We knew that this would that we would already have some existing relationships, and that would be the foundation for the mentoring program. Given that the New Zealand Parliament is the largest parliament and probably the best resourced across the Pacific, it was thought that the New Zealand Parliament should host the mentoring program. The New Zealand Parliament already actively supports other parliaments in the Pacific region with programs that develop the capacity of members of Parliament, clerks, speakers and other parliamentary roles. Also, the CPA Secretariat function for the region sits within the New Zealand Parliament. So for the ease of control and development, we thought we'd push the boat out and suggest that the New Zealand Parliament would be really great to host such a mentoring program. There are issues around ensuring that we could utilise the resources. We had them actually on hand. But one of the key things that we needed to think about was matching members of Parliament from the Pacific to women members of Parliament in New Zealand who would act as their mentors. So we put together the proposal to run the mentoring program. We put it to the steering committee of the Pacific region, who agreed it was going to be a great program to run. We canvassed members across the Pacific parliaments for support, and then we began to make it happen. Program development and matching. So broad themes and concepts are okay, but how do you develop a program on mentoring for women members of Parliament? Considering we hadn't really done this before. So the approach we used was to highlight key issues and opportunities. And I've got 3 key themes that I want to talk about. So firstly, what had the New Zealand Parliament delivered in terms of programs to members of Parliament and parliamentary staff in the past? How did it rate? And what had the participants said when those programs were evaluated? I had information about conversations that had been held between Pacific members of Parliament to do with requiring help to write legislation. How do we ask? What kinds of things do we ask when we're in select committees? How do we examine legislation? And we put these elements together with the programs that the New Zealand Parliament had already delivered to participants. And some of the things that they said that they would find useful within a mentoring program were things like writing legislation, the select committee processes, standing orders, the role of speaker, holding governments to account, and the role of opposition. We got some experts to actually help us in designing the program. So, for example, we got our Parliamentary Council Office to help with the delivery of the legislative program. We got the Clerk of Committee to help us with the Select Committee program, and we got the Office of the Clerk to help us with standing orders. It's important to say here that we assumed nothing, and we approached it from the point of view that we were all starting from a place where we had limited or no knowledge, so that we wouldn't miss out anything when it came to putting the program together. And we hope that the more experienced participants would forgive us if we were telling them how to do their job, but we knew it was important to capture as much as we could. So the second aspect we looked at when we developed our program was the things outside of the pure parliamentary process that might be useful as elements of the program. Things like party mechanisms to encourage women to stand for Parliament in the first place, how to run an electorate office, the importance of women's representation, and how to encourage participation across a range of leadership opportunities, taking care of ourselves and dealing with stress. Again, we took the approach of including experts to deliver these sessions. Dr. Jackie Blue, who is a former parliamentarian and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commissioner with the Human Rights Commission, delivered the session on representation and participation. Lua Manawau Winnie-Laban, a former minister and Associate Vice-Chancellor of the Victoria University, ran the session on dealing with stress and how to look after ourselves. We asked all parties to provide MPs or party officials to deliver a session on party mechanisms to encourage participation and support MPs. We asked all political parties to provide members of Parliament to do one of the sections, which was looking at how the different parties actually use their party mechanisms to encourage women into politics in the first place. And we were really pleased when we got a range of parties wanting to participate across the political spectrum. Let's not forget, we didn't really know what we were doing when we were putting this program together, but we thought that we had a good basis in programs we had delivered to other parliaments in the past. We kind of knew what we needed as new women MPs, and coupled with the fact that we had some real expertise prepared to deliver parts of the program, and we knew that we had some great women MPs in New Zealand who were happy to participate, we decided, well, let's do it anyway. Let's put it together and let's see what happened. So how did we find participants? We put out a request of interest to all the parliaments across the Pacific region for potential candidates. But we also put a request to members of the New Zealand branch of CWP to provide people as mentors. We had a bit of an idea of the New Zealand women members of Parliament, their biographies, their backgrounds and their areas of interest. But we were really interested in what types of women from the Pacific would want to come forward to be part of the program. So we asked them to send us a bio, a little bit about themselves, their family background, what their portfolio work was, what their interests were, and anything else that really might help us to match them suitably with a New Zealand Member of Parliament, whether they were engaged in sports, literature, arts, music, for example, or academia. We had lots of interest from the 11 parliaments other than ourselves across the Pacific region, but for some the timing was not good with elections or other matters of special interest, which meant that we couldn't actually get a roll call from across the wider Pacific region. In the end, what we did do was we were able to secure 8 women to be mentored by 8 New Zealand women members of Parliament. We had representatives from Samoa, from Niue, from Fiji and Tuvalu. As there were no women members of Parliament from the Parliament of Tonga, they actually requested that they send a man along. We thought about this for a while but decided that no, this was actually a program for women. So what we asked them to do was, if they were interested in sending somebody, could they send the candidate who had polled the most, the woman candidate who had polled the most in their recent Tongan elections. So they did. They thought about this and they actually complied with us, and they sent the woman to be part of the program who actually had gained the most votes but hadn't actually been successful in gaining a seat. So we began by getting the biographies together of the participants, and we began the very unscientific process of matching. The CWP New Zealand branch co-chairs, Jo Hayes and Louisa Wall, myself and the CPA Secretariat sat down one afternoon with the biographies of the women who had indicated they wanted to come from the Pacific Parliaments with the New Zealand women MPs who were going to be part of the program. Some of the areas that we looked at to match were around portfolio, the length of time they had been members of Parliament, whether they were in the opposition or government, the roles that they held within the Parliament and the status, for example, whether they were government ministers, and the interests and other areas that we gleaned from their bios about how they like to work and their style of self-management. With one exception, we appear to get the matching process absolutely right. And as you will hear from the next section, Program Delivery, we'll tell you a little bit about how that matching process then went on to be successful in terms of the mentoring program. Program Delivery. We chose a week in July, which was wet and cold and quite miserable. But for 4 days, the women from the Pacific joined women from the New Zealand Parliament in the delivery of the mentoring program. It was a sitting week, so for the women from the New Zealand Parliament, we were able to join the Pacific women at the beginning of the program and socialise with them when the House was in break time and during dinner breaks. The days of the program were pretty full for the participants, and they were encouraged to rest at the end of each day because the next day would be equally as full. So for the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of the program, it was pretty formal, interspersed with some socialisation and networking in order to develop some bonds with the New Zealand members of Parliament and other Pacific friendship groups. Feedback from the sessions most days was mostly positive. They liked the content, it was useful, sometimes not entirely appropriate given the variance of size of parliaments, but this was a bit of a work in progress. One session in particular, How to Run an Electorate Office, which was delivered by Parliamentary Services staff, was completely inappropriate. The New Zealand Electorate Office context it was quite foreign to many members of Parliament from the Pacific region, as they don't have the level of admin or electorate support that we are able to have in New Zealand. But it did actually give us an opportunity to examine how we could support through our parliamentary services what happened in the Pacific parliaments. And as a consequence of this particular part of the session, even though it wasn't entirely useful to the women members of Parliament, it gave us an opportunity to think about how New Zealand parliamentary services could actually support parliamentary services in the Pacific parliaments. And as a consequence of this, a secondment program was set up where a New Zealand parliamentary service member would be seconded to a Pacific Parliament for a period of time to learn about the needs that that Parliament had and how we could support them. So it wasn't entirely lost. The session that Lua Manawa Winnie Laban presented on dealing with stress and how to take care of ourselves was actually very special. The women felt safe enough to discuss their issues and disclosed some very real and poignant stories about the political violence that they'd experienced as members of Parliament and the difficulties that they actually had being members of Parliament. And it was for them a really safe and positive environment, and one where we thought actually we got some real benefit both in supporting the women to disclose and to support them through the issues that they raised. Friday of the program was a non-sitting day, and it was the day where the New Zealand parliamentary team was going to really engage with the women from the Pacific. So we set aside the whole day and allowed the women from the Pacific and the women from New Zealand to decide how they would structure their day, how they would actually form their relationships and build those bonds that were going to sustain them not only through this particular program but into the future. We also took the opportunity on this last day to invite some young Pacific students who were leaders in their own communities to sit in on the session and actually learn from the role models from across the Pacific, many from their home islands. We had a session on mindfulness and relationship building that started the day, and then we spent the next few hours in discussion, one-on-one, mentor to mentee, about how we would build useful working relationships with each other and into the future. The partners took the opportunity to bond in whatever way they wanted to, whatever way they thought was important. And we have some great examples of how they did that. Some firm relationships and friendships were formed, and they continue today. But I just want to tell you about each of the pairs and how vastly different they decided to engage with each other and how that works for them. So pair one, they have a mutual interest in health. One was a doctor, the other had been a former Minister of Health. The mentor took the mentee to her electorate office, and they discussed the ways that the electorate office team might be able to support the mentee in the future with admin and the like. As a result, the mentor actually set up an office with admin support for whenever the mentee happened to be in Wellington. The catch-ups were formalised. They would talk to each other at least twice a month. And then when the mentee was in Wellington, she would have access to this office and admin support. Once they'd established that, they actually went and had their nails done, would you believe, and had a little bit of downtime. They shared some lunch, and then they returned to the program office to feed back to the rest of the group. Pair two spent a couple of hours walking and sharing stories about themselves, finding that they had an area of common interest and that they had both been former sports people. They resolved to have regular catch-ups via email and hope to meet on the mentee's home island at some point. Pair three, unfortunately, were not a match. This was not our success for us, and eventually we discovered there were some health issues with the mentee. We sought some medical assistance and actually took her to the doctor. Pair four, they were the star pair in my view. They were two of the newest MPs, a new MP from New Zealand, a new MP from Fiji. They were both very bubbly personalities, and they decided to take a train from Wellington out to an outlet store to do some shopping. They did some shopping, they got lost, they had to ring the Secretariat to send a car out for them to pick them up. But in the meantime, they'd really formed a really great friendship, and they have gone on to develop some really interesting ways of staying in touch. They do a lot of video blogging, they do a lot of Facebooking, and they have decided to have a reciprocal return trip to the Mentee's home island, where the New Zealand Member of Parliament will actually support her Mentee on a program that she's delivering on the home island. And we thought of all of the peers, they were probably the most engaged and successful. Pair 5, they were quite a studious couple. They spent most of their time in the office in front of a computer developing their plan, and they email and phone regularly for catch-ups. Pair 6, New Zealand MP decided to support her Mentee by raising her profile in her home country, and has used social media to do so, and they catch up regularly. Pair 7 used external activities to build their friendship, and they have catch-ups in the usual manner. But what's happened since the program was delivered? Contact between most pairs continue. Contact is usually electronic, email, or via phone. There have been some face-to-face contacts that we've been able to arrange, and as I say, some of the New Zealand Members of Parliament have been fortunate enough to arrange to have visits to the home islands of their mentees. Office space is still provided and utilised by the member from Tuvalu, and a reciprocal visit is also being arranged. All others but one pair report regular contact, and this is a long-term project. We started in July. We've had several months of contact since that point, but we hope that this will be sustained not only for the life of these women as they have their political life, but actually that the friendships continue for much longer than that. But what have we learnt from all of this? The first thing we learned was be prepared to learn more from your mentee, or as much from your mentee as you provide as the mentor. Learning is actually a two-way process, and we have to be open to the opportunity to learn. The other thing we learned was sometimes things don't work out. Learn from them, don't lament. Be prepared to go off script, and in fact some of the most robust conversations happened when we did go off script. When the program doesn't quite go right, you can still turn it into a positive, and we learnt that by the experience of taking people to an electorate office and explaining how an electorate office works. That's actually turned into a program where our parliamentary services will actually go and support the parliamentary services in another Pacific nation. Relationships take time and they can't be forced. Moderate contact, change things up, do whatever it takes, but be prepared for the long term. Some of the contacts that I have with my mentees really is around issues that I might see flagged in the news, and I'll get on the phone to them. And likewise, if I haven't heard from them for a while, I'll get on the phone and just check in with them. But you have to be prepared for the long term. And it's really important to know that women in Parliament have somewhere that they can be safe and someone that they can be safe with. One of the most crucial parts of this whole program is that we provide an opportunity for women to seek support outside of their home parliaments, which actually means it's safe for them, particularly if they're new members of Parliament and don't want to appear to know less than they should actually know, being parliamentarians. So it was really important that we had this aspect that you could talk to someone outside of your home island, your home parliament, someone that would keep you safe. But most of all, what we learnt was actually as women we're pretty fantastic. We know how to have fun, but we also know how to do the serious work. Mentoring is a really important part of capacity building for our women parliamentarians. I hope you found this useful. I'm really open to hearing from you. If you want to hear a little bit more about the program, or if you'd like a copy of the template program that we put together, please get in touch. I'm really easy to find in the New Zealand Houses of Parliament. My name's Poto Williams, the MP for Christchurch East. Thank you very much.